Hey, everyone, welcome to my stream tonight. Um, yeah, sorry I'm a moment late. We're going to be talking about Qwik today, which is a really unique framework. It's part of, I'd say, a series of what I've been looking at the last few weeks. I've been really kind of digging into some of the more interesting takes around in terms of how we can accomplish one of the biggest challenges um, that we face right now with modern JavaScript frameworks, and that is to send less JavaScript. And there's a lot of different ways to attack this problem. So I want to look at it because the interesting thing that they all have in common is these are distinct approaches. I'm talking about Marco, React Server Components, and Qwik here, that all believe obviously that their way is the right way, and that they have to give up some special trade-offs in order to accomplish this, but it's necessary. And they all kind of accomplish similar things in slightly different ways. And I'm trying to see if there's something we can kind of learn from that. And Qwik's been kind of the one, one of the newer ones that I haven't been able to dig in as deeply to until recently. And Misko, Hevery, the creator of Qwik, and might know him as the father of Angular. He approached me a couple of weeks ago and he's like, "Hey, Ryan, I enjoy a lot of your articles, on like hydration and general topics. Why don't you take a look at Qwik? Tell me what you think, And I've been dabbling in it, since I first saw it, but it gave me the push to finally spend some time and build some stuff and play around with it. And it seemed it's perfect timing, right? For the stream for us to take a look at it here. Yeah, so everyone in the chat, I see you guys are kind of filtering in. Hey, hello, how's it going? Yeah. So, yeah, it's an interesting one, right? Because this is a unique take. So before we get into it, we start every stream with a segment called "This Week in JavaScript," and I gotta admit, this week has been a little bit more quiet for me. I mean, I wasn't involved in the big iOS, hogging all the browser, whatever garbage that was going on this week. That didn't really catch my eye. So, it's been a quiet week, but it's been also been a really inspiring week for me because I got to have some of the most interesting conversations that I've had on this subject matter in ages, honestly. Between I was already telling you all that I've been talking to Misko a ton recently. It kind of started from my last article, and we can look at that when we talk about resumable hydration. And but even beyond that, great conversations with the Marco team. We're just wrapping up. I call it the pre-alpha, but our pre-alpha demo kind of milestone for Marco 6. The first time we have a full app compiling from the tags API all the way to Marco 6 runtime. That's with all the code splitting and weirdness. We're not talking server hydration or anything yet, but enough to throw together a TodoMVC or JS framework benchmark, and that's all coming together this week. And it's been really inspiring. And I finally got the chance to sit down with Dan Abramoff and pick his brain about the future of React. So really, really fun week in terms of the conversations, but a little bit less. A little bit less going on in terms of the JavaScript world for me. I think the only couple things that came up for me this week that I really noted was obviously another comparison where people were talking about some optimization technique that you can use in React, and I piled on a little bit, but someone pointed out like, hey, with Solid, you can write them either way and they do the same thing, right? So that's always fun. But actually, probably the most interesting take was Juho Katz, co-creator of Ember. He said that his hot take was React does an excellent job of clearly identifying the problems that it solves in extremely confusing ways or doesn't solve at all. Basically, they're very transparent about their shortcomings and they document it really well. And I think that's really accurate. That's part of the reason that I like and respect React and the React team so much. Um, this isn't crazy thought to have, but they're very clear about the hook rules. Like the last thing they want is for you to kind of fall into a pattern where you know some unknown prevents you from doing what you need to do. What I mentioned actually is it's rarely the known constraints that prevent you from accomplishing your goals. It's actually the unknown ones that can have catastrophic effects. Like if you know that, hey, there's a rule that you have to follow, but you get all the good trade-offs, you just follow the rule. And even if it's a little ergonomic or clunky, you get what you need done. It's when you don't know the rule that things slide out of control. But honestly, the most interesting thing about this thread was something that happened partway down. I'm not going to chase it to find it, but what came up was that conversation again about why React uses class name over class. And someone in the thread, I forget who it was, someone answered and was like, oh, it's because obviously it's because you can't use class, it's a reserved keyword. But I mean, we're using class in solid. You can use class in Preact. I mean, it's basically you can make an object.class, and since props are objects, this is not really a blocker. What is though, and maybe the mindset is, React was originally treating all the props as properties, and they followed the property naming instead of the attribute naming, and I guess for me, this was perhaps a relatively obvious point because in Solid, we actually used to always set the props instead of attributes. When you just put a random prop on the JSX, we actually did props by default instead of attributes. It's way simpler and it's way more performant for most things. But ultimately, we ended up going with attributes because props have a bunch of edge cases around them, and attributes actually handle more situations better per se. And it's more natural to the way people use HTML. So I did actually switch to attributes afterwards, but it is an interesting sort of history lesson or thought that that naming is consistent that way. And as I said, as someone who's played with JSX and didn't think about it much, but a number of people in the thread, they're like it just never occurred to them. And it's kind of funny or interesting how the same sort of stories and reasonings propagate around through the community for years, and maybe like how much truth is in them, I don't know. It was one of those really interesting moments for me this week. What are you guys saying in chat? Anything fun here? Unrelated question. What's your opinion on Vite versus Next? Which is better? I mean, SWC is going to have better, like, it's hard to say. ES build, which is underneath Vite, is really, 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 really fast. SWC has an AST parser, which makes it more attractive to people doing custom things. The thing with Vite is they've just put together a really nice, usable package. I think it kind of speaks for itself. SWC is incredibly powerful. Next is great at DX, so I'm sure some great things are happening there. But I mean, Vite just sort of took off, and the important thing is it wasn't about end user adoption. From that perspective, Vite and Parcel could have been neighbors. It's that the framework authors, it came at a right time that the framework authors kind of jumped on it for their meta frameworks. And I mean, obviously, I'm involved in a couple of those, being Marco and Solid building their stuff on Vite, but Svelte Kit, it was just the right tool at the right time, and it's just kind of blown up from there. So, I mean, I would love to write Solid's Babel plugin in SWC instead, write it in Rust. But generally speaking, just where it is in terms of adoption and people being able to use it, Vite is way ahead, even if SWC might be more compelling ultimately. Okay, so yeah, I mean, it's a hard documentation task, to be fair. Like, there's always shortcomings. React is one of the better ones on this. Svelte might not be one of the better ones on this side of things. So I try my best with Solid, but a lot of times when you're a smaller framework and you have less resources working on it, it's more of an accident of omission rather than like any intentional gap. Some other frameworks are almost misleading but of the big three, I don't think any, or four, I don't think it's the case. I think you find that a lot with, the hungrier frameworks that are kind of like, 5, 6, 7, 8, range, who just want to kind of get some wins, get people in there to check it out without necessarily being honest on it to a certain degree. But I don't think that's terrible. I think it's usually just you kind of consciously are like, oh man, I don't really want to talk about this, and then you end up just maybe not documenting it, but as it will always catch up with you. So anyway, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. See, it's when if you're comparing like SWC to ES Build, I'm not gonna lie, I was not excited about ES Build. I looked at it and I was like, okay, yeah, so it does the one specific thing really well. This is not a replacement for Babel, and then kind of bugged them and went to Evan and was like, can we do plugins? And like, oh yeah, I can kind of do plugins, but it wasn't like AST, it wasn't the same thing. So I don't even view those pieces as competitors. Vite kind of just makes whatever it can work, right? You kind of got like sandwich roll up on top of ES Build, and underneath it's a bit of a mess, but it all kind of just works nicely. And that's all you need for V1, maybe V2. And I'm confident that they're going to clean stuff up and it's going to be really nice in the future. I mean, there's enough investment in it now. It's one of those examples of, what's it, build it fast, build it fast, build it good kind of thing. It really captured what they wanted it to, and it's out there now and people are using it, so they'll just make it better. All right, so where are we at? Yeah, so yeah, I mean, like, honestly, what else happened? I mean, I got a chuckle over this one. I've never seen this syntax. Check this out. Is this svelte at const? Honestly, I thought I was looking at some weird version of Marco's tags API or something, and it had the @ signs and stuff. I mean, I can see the power of this in the co-location thing. This was not the last thing I expected from Svelte. Like, a lot of people who are in the Svelte camp are so adamant about how it's just JavaScript and HTML that adding powerful syntaxes like this I thought was off the table. I mean, even Rich has credited the success of Svelte is not kind of pushing the syntax too much. Maybe they're a little bit more pushy on the templating side, but it's just interesting to me because honestly, when I see stuff like this, it gives me hope that people are excited about this. Then they should be excited about Marco, because Marco syntax enables incredibly powerful things, as we talked about in previous streams. So yeah, anyway, yeah, I think the only other thing for me was, and this kind of ties into what we're talking about today, was my article, why efficient hydration JavaScript frameworks is so challenging. I didn't retweet it, but it got featured as the top 7 article on Dev2, which is cool. I've only had that happen 3 times in the last couple years to 3 years to actually, I guess not quite 3 years yet. So really cool to see this article getting recognized. I think it's really good that everyone read it. Incidentally, this is 2 weeks in a row for that. My last article, the one I released the week before, also got featured, which is crazy. So the last 2 articles, I guess, are pretty timely and important, and that kind of ties into my conversation today, because a lot of what we're talking about today kind of spun out partially from a conversation that I had with Misko in the chat on this very article. So yeah. All right. Let's kind of switch gears here for a minute then. I think we are done with This Week in JavaScript. So let's talk about Qwik, right? Let's make the transition. And I'm gonna just throw it right out there. This is gonna be probably the first question for a bunch of you, because I put it right in the stream title. I called Qwik the Resumable framework. What the hell do I mean by that? Well, Qwik is a JavaScript framework. It uses JSX. It kind of looks like React in the way that Solid looks like React. It's not the same, but you squint, you kind of see the same sort of stuff. But Qwik is very different in that, like Marco, it is been built from the ground up with this kind of concept that we don't want to send all the JavaScript. That's the goal. We want to be able to load our apps and not take that hit. I mean, Qwik was built for e-commerce the same way that Marco was built for e-commerce. The focus here is that initial cost, not just the rendering cost, but the initial cost of hydration, the time to interactive, loading all that JavaScript, loading all those scripts, getting all that going, actually affects your bottom line. It affects sales. It's been shown to affect like how many items go in people's cart. Like there's a bunch of data for years on this stuff, and you just have to look it up. And you will find tons of examples. Obviously, a lot of companies only share some of their information. eBay obviously had a study, I think a couple of years ago, where they're showing that, like, I mean, it wasn't a big thing, but like every 100 milliseconds increased the number of items in cart by 0.5. So I guess every 200 milliseconds was an extra item in cart or something. It made a relatively, you can argue about, how much that impact actually is, but it's been shown consistently across the industry that there's a direct correlation between the kind of responsiveness and loading of a website and the sell-through rate. So this SEO stuff matters, and matters even more now because Google is using it to rank the actual search results listings. So there's a lot of people who are starting to feel the pain of that, especially as their sites get larger. And the truth of the matter is, and we've kind of talked about this a bit before, is this is not just like a feature you just add. You're just like, oh yeah, I was thinking, my React app or Meta framework or whatever is a little slow today. Let's just add some partial hydration in there, or add some, it doesn't really work like this, because it's an architectural thing. And I've been hinting at it in my recent articles, but I mean, this is a different take than Marco. And I haven't practiced explaining this to people, so we're going to give it a go. I got a Scala draw ready. I got a playground where I can dump in some code, and let's just talk about what I mean by resumable for a minute. I'm going to use Solid as an example so that I can show code that people here might be familiar with. But we've all seen the silly counter, right? Counter, click the button. But I've added a couple things in here. And essentially, what I added in here was I added a memo for double count, and then I'm using that double count to create an effect that writes the document title. So essentially, whenever the count changes, it affects double count, and then it updates the document title when I do this as well. And we're not seeing this right now because of the way the playground works, but essentially, I wanted to throw a few different primitives in here just for people to kind of mentally understand the difference between, say, React or Solid and what Qwik is doing. Because here's the thing. Now, pretend this counter has been rendered on the server, okay? We have, a button. It has a count in it. In our case, you can't click the button on the server, so it's gonna have a 1 or whatever. My initial value is gonna be in there. But when the page first loads, we'll have rendered this button with a 1 in it, right? Regardless. So the question is, what code of my component here actually needs to be ready and in the browser at that point in order for our app to be able to have the correct behavior, right? That's the first question you should be asking yourself. And the truth, we only need a couple things, if you think about it, right? We need a click handler minimum, right? We need to be able to click it and have the number update, right? And we need a second thing in this example, and I don't know if Qwik has gotten into it, but I'm just teaching the general concepts here. I know this is on their roadmap. If this document titles, like as people know, for most frameworks, effects don't run on the server. They can't. So you can't like do something like add a jQuery plugin. Like you have some client side only code, like updating this document title. This also technically needs to run initially, because otherwise the title won't be the right title, or the side effect won't happen. So you have client-only render code, like you have in effects, and you need to have some click handler. These two things need to exist at the time of hydration. But technically, most other stuff here in our ideal world would not need to exist here. Like when you load it. And the truth of the matter is, we might not even need to load the code for the click handler, because the click handler, increment here, it closes over a set count, which pulls in the state. Like there is some other code that comes by having this click handler here. So the concept with Qwik is it knows from its compiler that there's a click handler here. It doesn't need to necessarily know what the click handler does. And as I said, I don't think the effect thing is there yet, so that's something that's coming. But essentially, if we just go and attach some kind of click handler, maybe a global click handler that knows where all the clicks are, serialize this like location into this button element in the DOM, then we don't need to run any of this code initially. And when we click our button, at that point, we can load the code that we need. In a sense, this is one piece of being resumable, but it's not the whole story. But this is the starting point, right? Because once you've kind of split out your component into these pieces, in a sense, it does just pick up where the server left off. It's a little bit more complicated than this, and this is why I put a bunch of these other things in here, because obviously, if you have like a VDOM library, like React or something, or at that point you would be rerunning the component over again and doing all this work. And one of the cool things with a reactive system is if you can serialize these values from the server, then when you hit them, you don't need to run them again in the browser, and you can just kind of pick up where you left off. And that's kind of where Qwik's heading with this as well. But essentially, the whole idea here is initially you just set up some click handlers or handlers where you interact with the DOM. And then once you interact with them, then the rest of the code comes as needed. And I'm going to pull up the article where Misko kind of highlights what the different pieces are. But essentially, in contrast, a typical framework, and this includes Solid and Svelte and React, they run once. They run over this. They might not do a ton here, but like in Solid's case, when we hydrate, we go, oh, okay, here's the counter, set up the state, set up the initial, set up this double count, hook up the increment counter, run the effect. You have to do that anyways. And then sure, we won't like reinsert stuff in the DOM necessarily, but everything, we wire up everything. As anyone who's seen Solid, that there's effects are essentially the way we render the DOM. I'm not going to get into that right now, but essentially we run everything once and just kind of get all preset so that when we do the next change, it's all wired up. But as I said, Qwik's whole thing, and it achieves this through a number of ways, is that it doesn't run that. Essentially, it only runs exactly what is needed as it hydrates, and it does it all lazily. So instead of starting top down, it actually just works off interaction. Yeah, in the DOM thing is can be a little bit misleading, and we'll look at that in a minute. There is information like the event handlers that are serialized in the DOM, but the actual data itself, I made a kind of a stink about this a few months ago because I was just like kind of downplaying, and it turns out Qwik actually, Misko confirmed, does work the way that I would have. They changed it to work the way that I would think it should work, in that like the hooks, the pieces that they need to hook into are in the DOM, but then they pull the data out into like the typical serialization format where they can dedupe it and do all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's tricky. Have you noticed that Meso doesn't consider responsible to rendering these? Well, That's an interesting question. We'll get to that. Today we're going to look at an example that is a client rendered Qwik app. It took me a little bit of work, and Misco helped me put it together, but we will take a look at that in a little bit. It did take me a little. It did take us a little work. I talked to the team. We figured it out. So it is definitely doable. But yeah, the whole point here is, and I emphasize this: if you build a single page app and you build a single page framework and you build it that way, you can optimize that. Like Solid was optimized for the single page case. It's one of the most optimal things. You can tell every piece of its design was optimized for that. Obviously, I've done a lot of work on server rendering and bridging the gap on that, but you can make completely different assumptions if you can assume that the servers are always there. And that's why Marco and Qwik are differently designed. They assumed that the server was always there right from the beginning, which completely changes the kind of assumptions you can make. It can drastically change the design of your framework. So yeah, I mean, it's a funny comment. You could kind of go either way on that. Like, as in, I'm big on things that are built for purpose, so to speak. So, anyways, kind of popping over here a bit is because I highlighted out of order hydration, which is part of the equation here in my last article, where I basically mentioned that the part of the big secret or trick to Qwik is because of some rules they set in terms of how projections work, like passing children in, they eagerly evaluate. You know how Solid uses all its control throws through components. Like with Qwik, you don't do that kind of pattern. It wouldn't work. But like because of and actually most frameworks don't work this way, which is part of the thing. But because of these sort of restrictions Qwik puts in, you essentially have this ability, and because of serialization I was just talking about, like the intermediate data, you have this ability to hydrate a component down in the middle of the page without hydrating a parent component. And I mean, it shouldn't be hard to see if you think about it. The problem is if you top-down render and everything's kind of tied together with closures and event handlers and props that run through your whole tree and context and all that, and then you click a button down in the middle of your page, like even if you do the like, oh, I'm just gonna attach the event listeners and not lazy load everything, you're not winning. Like you press it and then suddenly you freaking load the whole page, and you just pushed the whole cost on your end user of hydrating the whole app. I wouldn't be surprised if some frameworks or I can't see anyone from an actual framework doing it, but like I can see someone from like maybe a meta framework or some kind of like hot new, library that come out with this technique of just attaching the event handlers and then hydrating the whole app. Because guess what? You will get really nice Lighthouse scores, but your app will suck. Like lazy loading, it takes more than just you making a spa and then lazy loading the whole thing when you click a button, because like you're just pushing the cost off. Like if it's happening while the page is loading, yeah, it sucks. There's input delay, it's sluggish, you try and scroll, you can feel it. There's a lot of bad things about that. But if you push it off to when someone clicks a button to load the whole app, you're just guaranteeing that you're going to make them wait. So it's important to understand that the part of the equation here is out of order hydration, this way of breaking it out. And what actually Misco says, he's like, the secret to resumability is that there's these 5 things. And I think he's going to write an article about this coming up soon. I went a little too far, but I just want to highlight these 5 things so everyone can kind of see what this is. First, most obvious question is, how do you serialize listeners? If you can't do that, then you have to rehydrate, essentially. So we just talked about that. You need the ability to add the event listeners, right? How do you render components out of order? If you can't do that, then you'll be forced to render the parents and the children, right? Which is what I talked about in my article. Then you need to know which component is invalidated on state changes. If you can't do that, you'll be forced to re-render the whole app. So everyone on my stream should be pretty familiar with this. If you want to invalidate on state changes, there's a bunch of different ways of doing it, but one of the easiest ways to do it that doesn't require top-down orchestration is reactivity. So, that's another piece of the puzzle. Have a way to watch data without running the code. So this is the whole idea of the use effects and the memos. So this is still talking about reactivity, but essentially, if you can piecewise the reactivity and have a way of knowing the dependencies at hydration time, then you don't need to rerun it. And then finally, have a way to deal with data that's not serializable. This is a hard problem. This is the area that Qwik's getting into, and honestly, with on Marco 6, this is also exactly like on the design part. This is the kind of last piece. We have idea, but this is where a lot of our more theoretical work is happening right now on number 5. Because I haven't talked about this much because I don't want to reveal it ahead of time. But Marco 6 is also a resumable framework like Qwik essentially. So I wanted this list is a great list. I think it actually does cover the things you actually need to achieve this. And as I said, there's different ways to get there. And I think that's why I'm most interested in on Qwik. I hope these explanations are somewhat making sense. I know it's a little vague. We might have to just tear into the code to take a look and understand what's happening here a bit, but to see it in action. But this idea is essentially, if we can break stuff apart effectively enough and attach some basic click handlers or basic interaction points, then we should be able to load the JavaScript as we need it. As I said, and we've covered React Server Components and Marco, and you can already see a huge difference here. To end this section here talking about resumability, and that is that, I mean, React Server Components aren't concerned with resumability. So I'm going to take that off. But the difference with this approach is in React, you go .server, .client. You're very explicit, and Astro's like this too. You kind of set up your islands, and it's like, it's kind of coarse grained. It's not granular, and you just kind of know. You very explicit, because if it was granular, it'd be impossible for an end user to write it. It'd be very difficult, right? So you just kind of in wide sweeps tell the framework how to split stuff up, and you go, okay, the server stuff doesn't go to the server, the client stuff stays in the client, right? In Marco, Marco 4 or 5, compiler kind of automates for you, but it's kind of the same as server components. Marco 6 actually goes super ultra granular but in a different way than Qwik. It slices it the other direction a little bit, and it helps so the end user doesn't have to worry about it, but it still uses the knowledge of what's stateful to kind of split it up. Qwik, on the other hand, has no idea of what's server or client, so it doesn't use that heuristic or decision to decide what gets shipped to the browser. And what's interesting about that is a pure lazy loaded approach means that you could apply this to the most interactive app you've ever seen, where every cell is a super interactive thing, and still achieve some sort of partial hydration. Whereas with React or Marco, even though you can obviously say lazy load this or whatever explicitly, it's still like its decisions on what code gets shipped are based on what's server and what's client, essentially. So it's different, and this is why it's interesting, right? Because in one way, Marco is trying really hard to see how it can maximize the use of knowledge in terms of the compiler and the analysis to be able to achieve similar things. And Qwik is kind of like, we're going to make something work even without that knowledge. And those come with different set of trade-offs. So I think this is why I'm so interested to take a look at this. Yeah, this was from a few minutes ago, but it's a good point. Okay, it doesn't necessarily have to be like having a backend there. You just need to have some pre-rendered HTML. Okay, so hopefully you all are still with me. Let's continue. Let's go to our next thing. I think the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to just pull down their TodoMVC. I think everyone's going to see it, but they updated it, I think, this week just to Vite, which threw me off a second. But it helps me kind of see the evolution of the framework, and this is something that's fun. Like I'm just saying this up front here. They're still rapidly adding stuff right now. Like the APIs actually changed between me doing one of my demos that I was working on and downloading this latest one. Like they literally changed the names of APIs. Like I think, where is it? Yeah, this used to be use store, now it's create store, which obviously I love because I think there's another framework that uses create store. So it's a good nod. But let's look at this Hackernews example. It looks like a bunch of components in a components folder. Let me blow this up a bit so we can see here. And then, yeah, let's look at the anatomy of this project, and then we'll run it. So I actually haven't, let's npm install while we're talking so we don't waste time, because I honestly, this is the only demo I haven't even tried yet. I just pulled it down. So let's hope it works. Essentially, this looks like a VDAP. There's an index HTML where there's some Vite specific stuff in here. And then there's an entry server, which, renders string. And then it's rendered from the HTML completely. And it looks like we have an app entry point and we have Qwik loader. And this is like their script that does all the magic, to my knowledge. And then and then it looks like these are some to-dos that are essentially preset that gets passed into the app. So then, so this is full isomorphic with server rendering. And we have a state file. This looks like so this is like the store. It's got like all the methods, like the filters for the to-dos and all this stuff. Okay. Some of you who've looked at Qwik have probably already looked at this example, but this is slightly updated. It looks like they've kind of broken it into a more normal looking kind of pattern here. So we saw the entry point was app. So there is some stuff here that I don't know exactly. Like I've never seen with styles before, but styles or app CSS. So this is probably, if you notice in Qwik, every place there's a $sign, it's kind of like an injection point. And we'll probably look at that in a little bit, but I believe every time there's a $sign, the compiler kind of breaks that up into its own sort of fragment that can be lazy loaded independently. So we have the component, and then we have the with styles, and then we have a render that wraps the return JSX, essentially. So I think this is the anatomy of a pretty standard component, right? Where essentially you denote a component this way, and then you separate the rendering from the logic. And I believe this helps them split the components into three ways, right? Because we already looked at it. There's the events, there's the component code, and then there's the view code or the render body. So having these hints helps the compiler see essentially how to split things up, is my understanding. So yeah, this is a to-do app. We have header, main, footer, and the header of the to-do app does all the work. That's in TodoMVC, exactly. It's our input. So this is a good example. We see the initializing state. So the state, I believe, is a proxy object, that a mutable proxy. So it's like create mutable in solid, essentially, where you have an object forms, right? Because of it being a proxy, I'm assuming you can't just have, it's not like use state in React. Like you can't just have like a single value. You always pass an object, and then you access the property on the object. Interesting here. I guess I'm not sure what this is for, but this is part of the pattern here where you kind of denote a name for the component. It's probably to help generate the URLs for the lazy loading. And then this component actually doesn't have the $sign on it. The $sign's been transcended to here and then here. Yeah, so the important one here, I think, is the click handler, because you notice the $sign on it. And this is kind of a giveaway, but on key up, yeah, see, you can, this is interesting, right? You notice how the event isn't getting passed in through the closure, and they're using like a hook for it. It's sort of injecting it. This is all tricks so that these can kind of be wired up independently. So they have explicit ways to pull these things in. Yeah, so use event. This is how they get the event in. And then, yeah, grab the value off the input, update the state with the new value. And then if the key is enter, add the item and clear the value. Okay, so this is just your, like, when you're in the to-do and you're entering the new to-do. Okay, you know what? Let's just run this and see what it does, right? I'm trying to remember. Let's follow the README here. npm install, npm run dev, npm run build. Okay, so let's npm run dev. npm run dev. Awesome. Localhost 3000. Feel free, by the way, you all in chat to ask any questions as we go here, because um, definitely help me direct the what we're looking at here. But this is the sort of classic example. I can tell the styling looks are familiar. I don't know where the actual header is. It's actually not here, but this looks like a classic TodoMVC. Let me see here. So first thing, you know this is what you want to test when you go in Qwik. You open the page, and we're in dev mode, so this is probably not going to be exactly fair, because dev mode's not going to give us the Qwik experience because of the what do you call it, the way bundling works in Vite and the non-bundle. So I almost don't want to do this in dev mode because I want to look at it. It's fine. Let's look at the HTML. I think that's a good place to start, because you can kind of see what's going on here. I did talk about this on one of my previous streams, but this is so much more visual of what's going on here, because the body is the start and there's this Q base. But then if you look at here, these components essentially tell, like, it's serialized into the DOM, like what code to load for them, like on Q render, source component app, h app component on render app component. So this element goes, okay, hey, and then there's some references to to-dos and an ID and an object. And my guess is if we look down here, okay, this is the Q resolver code. We remember that. There it is, Qwik JSON. We're going to be able to see some stuff here. Yeah. So yeah, here, this isn't unlike most frameworks. If you ever do SSR, you serialize the data in, essentially. So here is our to-dos, right? Here's the state of all our to-dos. Title, build, hello world, completed, false. Basically these keys refer to keys. So this is the secret to how Qwik doesn't do closures, because essentially the elements all know the dependencies written into them. So you don't need the JavaScript code to do that. You just go like, here's where the code is. Here is the references on the elements to essentially where the data is. So I think let's just play this game. What happens if I check this? Oh yeah, nice. Okay. I don't know why this one's red right now, but it doesn't matter. You saw that the second I clicked on it, a bunch of scripts popped in, like on render input on click. So it loads the click handler, and then it calls toggle item. And I want to believe that toggle item comes in from state here, at which point it loads the shared state and does what we need to. So essentially, and does it happen to you when I unclick it? Okay, no. How about when I remove something? Okay, so fun. Okay, let me refresh this and see what's up. It's also possible that I just got the latest version of the demo and it's broken slightly. Yeah, so an item is missing. Yeah, so this is the new Vite build. I haven't played with this, so this is on me. I knew that there would be a chance that we might not be able to kind of keep up with how stuff is going. So you know what, I'm gonna move on from this demo. I think if people don't have any questions so far, I mean, this is the basics. You can kind of see how, like, on click, even like the events literally tell you what code to render. But as I said, this Vite thing is brand new. They literally pushed it up like yesterday. So yeah, maybe there's a couple little bugs in the system here around that. But essentially, it's really kind of cool how you can see, like, they basically prescriptively tell you, like, on click, load this code, and it's all kind of async handled. Okay, so not very easily, actually. And I talked about this at the beginning of the stream. Like, it's not just serializing the event handlers. Like, how, I mean, there's a couple other things. Like with Solid, you need to serialize all the primitives values in and then restore them. And even then, like, our control flows work. Like, we couldn't be as granular. I think there's different ways to attack like React has server components and stuff. I think there's different ways to attack parts of these problems, but what makes Qwik so interesting is it is not easy. Like other frameworks don't get to do what Qwik does. Like that's just, it's not, they don't work this way, right? I mean, I was actually talking with Misco way back, like early, and we were talking like, well, why don't we just kind of like use Solid as like the renderer, and then we'll like kind of build some of the kind of quick, like Misco only really cared about making sure that this out of order thing worked. And he's like, I don't care that much about the rendering. I don't care, let's I'll use best in class. Let's just make it thing. And he looked at like every framework, and it just wasn't going to play ball. Like technically speaking, there was a path with Solid potentially if we changed how create component worked. But like it would be a different framework essentially. And that's the key, right? Like we could share our reactivity, and that's still something that we're talking about, but it's like Qwik is Qwik because it's not like the other frameworks. I think this is going to be one of the things that I think it's going to take a bit for people to understand. When people go bug people about partial hydration and lazy, like some of the stuff, they go, oh, just can you add this? That's going to be a common thing on this stream for sure. How much lazy code can you stand to load at a user interaction? I don't know, and that's what I want to find out as part of these experiments we're doing. Honestly, I think there's a balance here, and I think as we dig, we'll kind of get a better feel for it. But unfortunately, this example is not working. But luckily for everyone else, see, like, look, the input's even missing here. Luckily for everyone else, I have more examples. So let's just keep on going. I don't know what's. As I said, I just fresh installed this and it's not working. But this stuff's a work in progress. So let's move on to what I was actually working on this week. This was just kind of a, the demo. I think if I went online, I could probably find the to-do demo again, and they have working ones. Like I'm not convinced. Like what's going on here? Yeah, there's something in the build that's making it not find stuff. One of the weird things about this, yeah, I don't know what's wrong with it, honestly. But let's move on to what I was working on. I wanted to see if I could make my Hackernews demo, because as you all know, it's been kind of one of my favorites here, and it's a nice one for kind of showing initial page level and partial hydration. It's not very good for, it doesn't show how it scales exactly, but it's not very good for like, there's not very much mutation, but it's a very easy one for just seeing loading patterns, and Qwik obviously has a great pattern for loading. And I'm not gonna lie, I mentioned before that Qwik has this really unique quality in that how it can kind of hydrate inside out. I wanted to put that on display. I was like, I'm gonna make a client-side router, and I'm going to load the Hackernews page with no JavaScript. Then I'm going to shrink a comment and load the JavaScript comment. And then I'm going to route to a different page and then load the router. So like no JavaScript, piecewise partial hydration into a single page app experience, and show everyone what I was talking about a few months ago when I said that Qwik was the only framework that was a transitional, had the potential of being a transitional app, as in that kind of Rich Harris definition of transitional. But there's a few pieces missing in Qwik today that didn't let me get to where I needed to on that side. And the truth of the matter is, and I knew this instinctively, that's not the best pattern for Qwik. Qwik actually, like Marco and React server components, wants you to route on the server. I had a whole article about that a couple of weeks ago. I was like, everything's running on the server. It's the same here, because the thing is, if you slice stuff into 1,000 pieces, I mean, not that many, like whatever, 100 pieces, even if you're kind of smart on how you group stuff together, once you go and navigate to that new page and make the client render it, you have to load all the code. And then suddenly you're just like loading all the JavaScript and doing like, it's not going to be the best experience. And you could come up with smart ways where you're like, okay, I'm going to have this cut up part version, then I'll have the bundled version for navigation. You can do all that, but it's just not natural. What you really want is something like Turbo, but better. And React Server Components is one answer to that problem. we're working on something else, or we have some ideas of how we can do that with Marco, and as well, like a different version of that. And I think everyone working on this problem very soon will realize this is a routing problem and be working on routing in this area. And so I kind of gave up on that and just went to a classic, what do you call it? A classic MPA setup. So this is cool because guess what? They have a Cloudflare template. So I can put this up right against all our other Cloudflare demos that we've been doing over the weeks. And it's a nice setup. This is just a roll up, but essentially I was able to just take the same thing that I made in Remix, I made in Solid, I made in Marco, and just kind of run it through its paces. So how does this work? Well, index.cloudflare. Unsurprising to everyone, it's very simple. You add a list handler for fetch, and then you pass through the static assets, and then Qwik has some caching stuff. I turned the caching off because I wanted it to be the same as all my other demos. And then essentially we set some headers, and where is it? Response. Render app await would pass the URL in, set some headers, and then send the response back. And this just feeds into this index file, which is basically the kind of root of our app. And this render app, what I did was I found a really cheap, quick little router here called URL router. This is the one we actually use in the Marco Cloudflare examples, and just mapped the URLs to a component and a data loader function. And I'm a big guy on the streaming side, but like obviously this doesn't have any of that. It's literally match the route, block to get the data, and then pass the data into the app when you render the string. But essentially, render from the HTML head. This is very easy to port. Once I gave up on the client-side routing, I was able to make the rest of this app in like an hour. It's the same API that I've been using on all the demos, and the only thing was they had the original demo having all the components in one file. I just kept it to make it easy. This was actually really, really easy to do. I just, got rid of the class names from the Remix example. I kept the Remix example as my base because they don't have like the 4 show components. They use React style. So just, this is the same markup that I've covered before with everyone on stream dozens of times now. The only difference now is the component name, the $sign, this whole thing. And as I said, this person's using useStore. This is from a week ago. But essentially, it has the same click handler doing the toggle to compress the comments, and there isn't really a ton else here. It was actually really easy to build. I hit one snag, and it caught me up for like, I'm not gonna lie, I just gave up developing that day, and I came back a different day when I figured it out. It's because when Qwik's compiler gets a little bit better, it'll be easier. I was just prototyping some stuff for the stories page, and I was like, before I actually had data to load. So if you notice, I'm actually splitting the props here in the render function. But originally, I just had defined some variables up here, and it was really funny because it was semi-working and semi-not working because this scope wasn't tied to state or props. I guess down here didn't know, because they get bundled separately, didn't know that they were related, and it was undefined. But for like a simple variable access, it wasn't complaining. But if I had like stories.length, then like a member property access would crash the app. And there's some work that needs to be done on error handling on these templates. So it took me a while, but once I figured it out, and actually built the app, this was pretty straightforward. And the end result is actually, let me see here, Qwik Hackernews thing. Our kind of similar Hackernews demo. This is MPA style. So like Marco, when you navigate, it's doing a full page load. You can kind of see it up here. And when we go to the comments, it's like this. There was one other thing that I hit. Inner HTML wasn't working properly, so you see the stuff isn't escaped. But as I said, these are small bugs that we can fix. And then you can, shrink and hide the comments. But let's look at what happens here on the network tab as we navigate around, right? So there's nothing interactive on this page. So right off the bat, the Qwik page loads and there's no JavaScript, and there's never going to be any JavaScript. See, so in a sense, because there's nothing to interact with to load JavaScript, even though Qwik has no knowledge of client or server components, it still effectively did the right thing and sent no JavaScript, and will never send any JavaScript. So like in that sense, Marco and Qwik are almost identical in this example with completely opposite approaches. However, when we go to a comments page, still no JavaScript. And at this point, Marco would have loaded a little bit of JavaScript. And when we press this, watch the network tab. 4 pieces of JavaScript, and then when we unclick it, 1 more comes. Now, you might have noticed something there. Did you see it? Watch the way the JavaScript loads in. 1, 2, 3, 1. It actually waterfalls, which is interesting. So obviously, I think for something like this, you would know not to package it into 4 different things and you bundle it together. We'll talk about that in a minute. But essentially, this is an interesting thing about lazy loading. This is a very minimal amount of JavaScript, but if you have lots of files and you don't load them in parallel, there is still a consideration here, right? Like what happens if I'm now on a fast 3G network when we load the page, right? Page loaded super fast, no hydration costs. But when I click this, what happens? Right, like this is a worst case scenario, but it took 2 seconds for it to respond to me. So like, it is interesting. And then this one, wait for it. Okay, so obviously we got to deal with that, but it is an interesting thing. Like I think for critical JS, you would just bundle it together anyways, right? You'd only lazy load things that needed to be lazy loaded or whatever. It is interesting because as I said, we still need a little bit of knowledge, even if we don't know what server or client. We still kind of need to do some smart stuff here. And obviously, I hit this kind of thing, and I was thinking about it, and Qwik has the answer to that question or that problem. They have this really cool tool called the Qwik Playground Builder from Builder.io, and I'm actually using a different example here that we'll show in a minute. But essentially, you can see all the different bundles they split it up into, and then you can you can configure this in the plugin. They have different bundling strategies. So if I say hook, you're going to see input, and you can see all these different files that they're going to bring in for this example, right? These are all separately code split. But if I say single, well, now there's this one file and this file. They grouped certain things together. They separated the event handlers, I think, but then the rest of it got grouped together. And this is a simple app, so you can't see it, but they also have a component mode, which groups it by components, and a smart mode that tries to use a heuristic to group it. So essentially, the way you bundle is a new dimension in how you could author a Qwik app, if that makes sense, which is interesting. Like it's a different sort of problem. Instead of worrying about server versus client, kind of thing, you instead trying to be smart about how you bundle things. And one of the ultimate goal, my understanding from this, is to use user analytics. So if you have like an e-commerce site and you see patterns on how people click, like if people always go to certain areas, well then you might start with something a little bit less optimal, like maybe the smart one, or maybe like single or component. Maybe component's a good middle ground or whatever. And you might load a little bit more JavaScript first, but over time you refine the patterns and figure out what the right patterns for your site is in terms of how to lazy load JavaScript. And as I said, it's interesting because this is one of those things that I think you kind of have to be aware of with this approach, because as I mentioned before in here, like, I mean, obviously now that it's loaded, it's super fast, but when you first load something like this, there could be a real cost to the lazy loading. Even like this, the funny thing is this is with the smallest amount of code. Like look at these files coming in. Like they're just little snippets. This is what I was getting at. Can you picture if you waited to load your whole React app and hydrate it at this point? Like it would be comically slow. I'd get out of my chair and walk over to the kitchen and come back before on a slow network, because like when you have full hydration on some pages on a slow network, like sometimes it can take like 7 seconds. That's what we're looking for, partial hydration solutions. 7+ seconds. So this is, even on a small grain level, this is still something that can be felt if your network is slow enough. So it's interesting because I think ultimately you do want a certain amount of critical JS always loaded. I think the zero JS thing is mostly a myth. Like it's mostly like oh, isn't that nice kind of thing, and it demos really well. But realistically, there's like a small subset that you definitely want always present. I feel because like you're otherwise at the mercy of the network. But as I said, with tools like this at your disposal, this is incredible. Honestly, this is such a cool tool. Like you can actually see, like you go on our playground and you can see the compiled output, and you can see that here. You can see how the imports and the lazy loading and all that kind of get pulled in. But this takes it a whole level. You see the bundler. It's like mixing the roll up and the like compiled output all into like one tool. So it makes sense why they've gone this way and why they've best this tool. I think this is going to be an area of really interesting research in the future. But just to sate any of those people who kind of love to kind of see how this loading stuff works, let's just drop this in. Why not? And see what we end up with. I'm pretty sure I know where we're going to get. Yeah, 0.9s across the board. As I said, it's unfortunate. It's blocking, right? We don't have streaming. That's the only difference. Marco's 0.8 because of like that little tiny bit of not blocking. But otherwise, unsurprisingly, if you don't hydrate, you don't hydrate, and the page scores are really good. There is a difference with this approach, although I think there's probably ways to solve it. But one difference here is, and actually maybe the bigger reason for the 0.9 is, and we already saw this earlier, Qwik is serializing all the data down, right? When we saw the Marco example, we saw that there was no data serialization happening because of the way the app was structured. Partial hydration and the knowledge of being on the server can save serializing the data. But in the Qwik case here, we can't we could probably explicitly be like, don't serialize this data, but it's not free knowledge. It's something that you probably could just like be like, hey, don't do this, right? Which isn't a big deal, but it's a consideration. I think it's more interesting when you have partial pieces, right? Because when we were doing the Marco demo, I didn't really show it, but you could send one field to the comment and then serialize the title, let's say, from every single comment only automatically, rather than sending the whole comment down. So I think there's going to be some interesting strategies here on the data side, because that's one thing that I think React Server like having the knowledge like React Server Components or Marco does have an advantage here, which means that for the I think if I remember correctly, for the demo that I showed everyone the other day, I don't have it right offhand, but let me see here. I think for a page with a lot of comments, like 290 here, we're going to see a lot of data, which means that regardless of how fast we partially hydrate, we're probably going to take a hit. Very similar to what Remix or Solid or Svelte did here. So it is an interesting, the different aspects. Okay, I mean, not much of a hit at 299, obviously. But if we, I did do it. If we grab my 1400 comment page, Oh, I killed Cloudflare. No, is this the right one? Ew, which one is this one? Sometimes, let me see what this one is. No, that's not the right one. That one's 288. Which one am I looking for? This one? Yeah, okay. Better than Remix, obviously, and better than Solid and Svelte. But this is a different kind of cost. I think this is going to be an interesting thing moving into the future. Is kind of playing out how much data serialization costs kind of play into this, and also obviously the lack of streaming hurts, which again that 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 that's a feature that I suspect will be coming. So I won't worry too much about that. I think generally speaking, though, that is one of the interesting things about this approach, because you need to be aware of the lazy loading and um and and the data. So I think this is interesting. I think in general, though, as we've seen, this approach delivers in terms of super fast hydration, super like, and the authoring experience, as I said, pretty familiar, right? Like, let's look at our code here one more time, from the Hacker News example here. This is just the same JSX. I was able to copy and paste it. So this is really cool how similar this was. This is very easy port for me to make. Obviously, all the JSX languages are really nice for that, but essentially, like, really powerful ability to just use the same patterns that we were very accustomed to and almost instantly get this savings. I think this is the only JSX framework that actually gives you that partial hydration story, right? Essentially, because um, it takes a certain amount of consideration. So how are people doing? Some questions? All right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank, thank you. Yeah, yeah. No, it's interesting, right? Because it's really cool how, like, you can see which keys of a tie to, like, which story. Like this is a story list, right? And if I'm right here, like it's all wired without actually loading the code. This is like a I think there's something really cool to be learned from this. I don't know how this applies exactly, but you can kind of see. Know what else is interesting? And maybe this is something I wonder. Qwik uses maybe not web components, but you see this story preview. These are my component things. They actually make an element for each of their components. They're probably not like actual web components, but this is interesting. So the component boundaries are actually represented in the HTML. I mean, I can guess why that is, and it's much easier to do transclusion, like, or projections of children's, like, slot type APIs with this kind of setup. But it is interesting because it means that components are DOM elements, which is interesting, definitely from my perspective. As I said, it makes a lot of sense. Now it's easy to serialize stuff. I wasn't picking up on it earlier, but nav stories. Yeah, why didn't I pick up on this before? You can actually see the components are DOM elements. Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's a good point, because why that big slowdown on that one page that I just loaded, when I grabbed it from there, and I think that's the key here, right? Because we were looking at this super slow, brutal, like, why are you loading 1,400 comments page, right? And this is a good exaggeration, obviously, but yeah, this page is 550 kilobytes, right? Here, and then if I load the same page, let's grab let's grab this. Let's load the same page in solid. I love having all the Hackernews demos. Yeah, what do we got here? Sorry, press the wrong button. I'm on the wrong screen. Let's load the same page in solid. Where is it? Yeah, that was weird. It was like cached because of the freaking service worker. Okay, there we go. It's 442. So there is some hydration cost, I guess, of writing everything into the DOM, like in terms of page size. But obviously, if I drop this in here, and what was it? What is it? hn dot Marco JS workers dev, and I think you didn't use my pluralize everything thing. Dylan did port my stuff over a bit. Yeah, this page is so freaking slow. Although the fact the header showed up so fast, like if that had a nice loading indicator, that would have been not a bad experience. Let me see here. Network. Let's load it again. I love that. Sorry, streaming is just so fun. Do you see how the header looks like it didn't even move, even though it's an MPA? 208 kilobytes. Yeah, so that's yeah. I mean, that's the winning. You're sending a page half the size when you can do smart data serialization. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not hard to understand why that. I'm positive this will be a place of focus in the future. I'm starting to like. I think maybe even why that's why, to a certain degree, why React went the way they did. Like when I first heard of server components, I was thinking, oh, it's just like they'll just render some components on the server, But they actually followed the rules of the tree, the same as Astro or Marco does, in terms of with a server root, you're not allowed to put server components and client components. You can only project them through children. And I'm gathering it's because with those rules, you can consistently know that it's impossible for the client to re-render state, which means that you can know that 100% you can't serialize that data. You mentioned that you ran into some scoping issues. Once you figured out, did it seem easier natural to board? Yeah, it was super easy once you know. I mean, the thing is, if you want to access the rule that I don't know if this is true, and they'll probably correct me on it, but if you want to access something in the render part of the function, either define it there or use state or props. If you just have some random like const or temporary variables in the component part of the code, it's not guaranteed to end up in the render part of the code. And in a sense, the API makes that really obvious to see. It did, obviously not knowing that, but I mean, to be fair, Qwik doesn't have the docs yet. I'm doing this completely blind, so I'm going to expect to be that with the help that I got on the Discord. I was like, oh, okay. Like, perfect example. We haven't seen it yet, but Qwik doesn't use props.children to do children projections. It uses slots, like web components or svelte or that. And I didn't know that. So obviously I'm like sitting there trying to go props.children, but like read the docs scenario. You see that in 2 seconds and it's intuitive. You know how it works, So as I said, I'm not too worried about that. I think it was just, as I said, I think the compiler for that one could have shouted a little louder in a way that I could understand. But generally speaking, I think things are explicit enough. The thing you got to worry about when designing APIs, it's what we were talking about at the beginning with React. As long as you know what the limitations are and they're spelled out for you in a way that's easy to see, then like it's fine. You know what I mean? Like, but you know what I mean? I have a biased opinion, right? It's the same reason when people complain to me profusely about not being able to destructure, I just kind of go, because like now don't do it. Like it's maybe I should be more sympathetic to those kind of things, but like those kind of things don't really matter. They're like superficial kind of window dressing kind of scenarios. As long as you like know the rules, you follow the rules. It's kind of like the hook rules. I'm also not bugged by them. Some people are like really annoyed by the hook rules. I don't really care. It's like I understand them. I follow them. Stuff like that just doesn't faze me pretty much at all. Like you come up with a reasonable set of constraints to go with your trade-offs. That's the cost of doing business. That's how it works, right? you know. But again, if I felt differently, maybe I would have, tried to join the Svelte team or something like and worked on that side. That's just not what I care about. I care about producing the best possible user experience for my end users and concerned with giving explicit control with clear defined boundaries. And I think that's possible with this API. I think there is a couple little things, and I'm interested if like there's I like the explicitity. I gotta say I like that they're being very explicit here with these dollar signs. Like part of me is like, well, if you know it's a component, do you have to return the dollar sign on render? Couldn't it just like return a function? Like if you've ever used JSX and Vue, like you return a function just like this. It's the same concept. That's how they separate the templates. They make sure you return a function. So you're kind of like, oh, well, if they know this is a component, could they just do that automatically? Yeah, maybe, but like on the other hand, this gives you complete control. Like it's explicit. Like once you understand what it does and why it's there, like my understanding is you can use other dollar sign operators to denote other things of this nature. And I think that's an interesting, almost like a language primitive that you can build on. So instead of viewing that as a downside, I view that as maybe something super powerful and really unique and a way of actually leveraging the system. I like having that kind of explicitly and putting that control back in the user's hand is something that I value incredibly. Um, it's like on the opposite end of the spectrum, right? As I said, having to be aware of this is reasonable trade-off to me if it means that I have the power and control to have code working the way I do. I'd rather not people hide it behind walls and stuff. Yeah, sorry, long rant for this, but I just want to make that kind of clear. Is I think this is one of those ongoing things, and I think maybe this isn't like 100% there yet. Maybe they have a few more tweaks and stuff, but I think this is already heading in the right direction. And I think it's a careful balance of explicit APIs and this kind of power and control. So yeah, I mean, the Hackernews thing was easy. I just configured my Wrangler and threw in my components for my other stuff, and like we were there. We deployed it. As I said, inner HTML not working was a little bummer, but I think I got what I wanted from this demo. I can kind of get the feel. This is a framework that still is in its early stages, needs to kind of work on certain details, but generally speaking, it's already delivering on the promise that it's making here on the no JavaScript side. If I'm just looking at building a simple e-commerce site, and doing this kind of stuff, lazy loading, this does a trick. Like I said, I'm a little bit more skeptical on the lazy loading side, as I showed before, but this is already going to be 100 times better than your React app. So, I can't completely show non-bias there, because I'd be like, you could also use Marco or a couple other things, but in terms of a competitive solution that does what it says it's going to do, you've got it here. So I think this is pretty compelling showing. So how are we doing on the stream? Let's see where we are at on time. So we're just over an hour. We kind of looked at this. So this probably may not be the longest stream ever, but I've got one more example. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else we can get from this Hackernews example. I know not a ton. I think the data serialization is interesting. I think everybody has their own loader scripts. There's lots of similarities and commonality patterns you can see in this. Data serialization is going to be an interesting problem for most frameworks in the future. But essentially, I think this demo, it's up there. Let me post this in the chat for anyone. Oh, weird. My screen is showing up weird. Is it showing up weird for you all? It's fine on my screen, but it's showing up weird through the. So how do you feel about Marco 6 in many ways not having explicit performance and the amount of optimization we handle? This is baiting a little bit, like leading question much. Okay, so it must be just StreamYard acting up. This I'm gonna have my preferences, but you know what? I'm gonna hold my final judgment on this stuff, on that aspect with comparison to Marco, because when Marco 6 gets a little bit further, we can talk about it more. Yeah, so it's just StreamYard being funny for me. That's fine. I'll ignore StreamYard. Okay, so yeah, I'm not gonna get too much into it. I obviously see before getting into all that aspect, I think the data handling Marco and React Server Components is, in terms of serialization, is an interesting, very obvious UX consideration. But I was talking to Misco, and he seems to think that he has a solution for that. So I want to see how this develops before making anything more on that side. Um, Obviously, there's trade-offs. Like, as I said, you kind of have to be a bit aware of the split between the component and the render function and the probably click handlers. But is this something that a better compiler could fix? Probably. You know, Dylan, how we handle hoisting and variable sharing and all that kind of stuff. So I'm pretty sure you could probably picture how to make the compiler work better in these scenarios, because we are doing those tricks in Marco. So I think on that side it's interesting and it's fine. I think you're right. I should probably comment on a bit more on this. I think on the optimizer side and this kind of mentality, I think this is a little bit challenging. I think when we see it automated, it's going to be really, really cool. I think that this is more of a place where, like, how to put it, like, this is a new type of consideration, and I don't know if I prefer this consideration over literally just being like, I know that this part of the code, it's like structurally is less important. Let's lazy load it. Like, you go, okay, there's this little widget over here that's less important. I'm just going to wrap it in a lazy. I don't know. I feel like my first gut feeling is I'd rather do that than worry about an optimizer. But I think it might depend on the type of app, right? So, uh, yeah, I don't know. I think this is a new dimension, and I'm not sure how much I like this being a new dimension, but that's partially because this is a new, and I'm not used to this being a new dimension. Okay, so we got one more demo to look at, and yeah, that one's done. That one I never ran, and that is another one of my favorites. I was like, okay, well, can we client render a Qwik app? So no server side. And the reason I wanted to do this is because I wanted to put Qwik in the JS framework benchmark. You know me, I love the JS framework benchmark, and uh, I thought it'd be, I've written so many things. In the JS framework, I wrote the one of the vanilla implementations. I think it's now it's probably the faster one. I wrote the solid implementations. I was the one who upgraded React to React hooks. I upgraded Svelte 2 to Svelte 3. I even though I'm not like the core maintainer of this benchmark, I've worked with lots of core maintainers of the different libraries. Like Dan chipped in when I did the React hook one, and like to kind of make this benchmark the best quality that I could possibly do. I added Alpine JS. I basically, whenever I come across different libraries, I want to see what I can do there. So here, I started working on this, and I got stuck because there was a problem with the client rendering. But then I got unstuck because a member of the Qwik team came in and actually helped me fix it. So I didn't quite finish making the benchmark, but we can give it a shot right now, or like we could probably do a little work here and get it actually working for us right now. So I'm going to go run build dev and have it working. And why is it spitting out so much stuff? Do I still have debug mode? I probably have some console logs from like some of the stuff I was doing. Yeah, so that's fine. It doesn't really matter. JS Framework Benchmark, if you've never seen it, is basically building this giant list of stuff. And they have a bunch of like random keywords, and you use a random, and then you build a bunch of data using that. And then essentially it's a bunch of buttons that get clicked. And then you see the quick click handlers. and then essentially it renders them in a table. It's like a giant TodoMVC, and there's a few things you can do with the table. And so far, I've implemented the base functionality. So if I am correct, I should be able to just, let's close this and close this down. I should be able to just go to localhost 8080 Qwik index, and I can see the basic thing here. And I don't know what's up with that styling, but whatever. Okay, so you see it created 1,000 rows, and you can clear them, and you can update every 10th row. You can see the exclamation marks, and you can swap some rows, and you can append some rows. And I actually, I'm missing two functionalities right now. I didn't implement the delete a row, and I didn't implement the select a row functionality. But essentially, I implemented all the main buttons. One thing that I'm actually interested in that I haven't checked is Qwik actually keyed? Because JSX thing was complaining to me about it being keyed or not, and I think it might be interesting to actually look and see if Qwik is actually keyed. For people who don't know what I mean by keyed, it's the idea that for every piece of data, the DOM element that it gets associated with it sticks with it. So if you switch the location of the data in the list, it's the same DOM element moves with it. Where in unkeyed, you kind of hijack other DOM elements as you move stuff. So the easiest way to see if something is keyed is to find that element, right? Like this tr, and then basically do something to it, like, I don't know, style equals what, background color green, maybe. Beautiful. Now when I swap rows, that should move with it. It doesn't. Okay, so it's not keyed, because if it was keyed, what would happen is when I switched it with row 99, it would essentially end up, the green would end up down here. And while you might be like, who freaking cares? The problem with non-keyed or key by index is that essentially, if you have animations or any kind of state that, sometimes with inputs and stuff, any kind of state that's tied to the DOM element, and web components, this is a thing that comes up as well. You're basically switching the data under it mid sweep, and it's sometimes hard to, well, not sometimes, it's often very hard to kind of switch it. Like, as you saw, now 99 is green, right? If this was a fading animation, or you're deleting something and then you swapped it, the different item would pick up that animation. So generally speaking, even though the JS framework benchmark has a keyed and non-keyed section, I basically just ignore the non-keyed section exists. It's basically, I consider it unsafe, and really, it's fine for primitive data, like when you have a list of strings or like an array of numbers or something. But for any kind of model data, you pretty much always want it keyed. And React yells at you furiously when you try and do something that's not keyed. And most VDOM libraries make a big deal of it. Interestingly enough, Svelte and Vue don't yell at you, and their default is non-keyed, which is bonkers to me. But they do both offer keyed. So I'm not sure how to key a list in Qwik. And I was afraid of this. I hadn't gotten this far yet because I had some build issues this afternoon, but this is not keyed, which means that I can't compare it to my other keyed frameworks for two of the benchmarks, swap and replace. Because if I'm correct, if I create 1,000 rows, again, it's going to keep see, still green, even though we're replacing all the items. You can kind of see why non-keyed is kind of terrible, but yeah, okay. I mean, as I said, most frameworks support this because you need to support both modes, but me just sticking a key on the list, like the naive approach that I was trying to do, actually, I can shrink all these windows down. I don't need them anymore. This one. Me trying to, as you see, what I tried to do here was just do the old React put the key on it. There's no docs for me to reference right now, so I'm going to have to. Yeah, I don't think we'll be able to run this, but we could at least kind of fill out the rest of the missing functionality here, just to get a feel for what it's like to develop in Qwik. Yeah, so yeah, and I'm about to talk to them about how they about key updates. As I said, every framework has it, so I'm sure it's either there and I'm not aware of it, or it's coming. But let me see. So we have the two last functionalities we want to add. So this should actually be pretty simple, I think, because we just need our onClick handler. And what do we need to do here? OnClick. And this one is selected. So I think it just is essentially selected, or state selected equals ID. Probably very easy. And then on click, when we delete something, we want it to be essentially, yeah, I wonder how they handle mutation. Well, we can find out. State.data.splice, and it's the index of the ID. So we need a couple other things here. Let's just. Beautiful thing is we can use one of the other many frameworks to reference the logic on how we want to handle this. I'm trying to remember what I did for solid. I did the immutable form of solid. I am curious how Qwik handles mutation. So we're going to use, this is fast, but the fastest way to actually remove something is using splice. So I do want to take that index and use splice on it instead of doing this. I think. So this is state.data, and then I'm gonna alias it to just make my life easier. State.data, and then let's do that. I think, just trying to remember which framework would have done a mutation based change. Vue, maybe. How does Vue do it? Not in there. It's all in here. Okay. There we go. Isn't that easy? It's not. Oh, yeah. You're right. I could use the index. You're right. It's interesting that most of them use the ID instead of the index, or use the. I use the ID usually because adding the index in solid has a performance overhead. Typical me optimizing even array indexes, but that is an interesting point that we, in theory, could just. So is it state? Yeah, actually, I still like aliasing it. So what is it here? State.data e.splice d. Okay. Let me keep this here for a moment. Refresh and get rid of our beautiful green thing. Can we select? Selection works. Yes, selection works. Deletion works. Deletion works. Okay, so Splice works nicely. Mutation-based APIs on the proxy. And could we just use the index? Probably. I kind of want to leave it the same as everyone else, though. But yeah, I think in this case, because it re-renders on every change. Okay, so anyway, that's dealing with mutable state is obviously has its benefits. It makes it very easy to kind of do this sort of pattern here. Oh, I'm a little bummed about the keyed updates though. Little bit, because I mean, can we see if they have anything? I mean, I know there isn't really any docs, but like, come on. We could find the code that does the array reconciliation and see how it works. That might be fun too. Right. Component, import JSON, render, slots, types, JSX. Wonder if this actually just has a hyperscript function and then we can just like look at it. Like, I mean, we saw this already, right? What's the compiled? Where's the optimizer? What's the optimizer for the like? This was the JS framework benchmark that we're looking at in here in the optimizer. What does the JSX look like? JSXS. So this is JSX. So whatever this JSX function is here that they import and JSXX. Okay, so that is our hyperscript function. Okay, so what's up? Where is it? Okay, JSX as JSX, JSX as JSX dev, and then JSX. Qwik JSX is okay. So it's the same function. So where the hell is the JSX function? Why am I not seeing it? JSX function. So this is a hyperscript function. Return JSX node implementation. Let's get a little bit size here so people can see what I'm looking at. JSX node implementation, children any constructor, public block props key. Is this just constructing an object and not doing anything else with it? Okay, red herring. I think this is just basically converting stuff into some kind of object form. I don't actually. I mean, it makes sense. It's a virtual node. But where? So it's where does it feed into? Let's look again at the compiled output. So return on render. It's interesting. You see this use of lexical scope here. This is where my create state came from. So I think all states tied together in the background. So it's almost like I call it dependency detection or injection, but I was corrected that isn't actually dependency injection. But it is interesting that it's basically keying it by the scope of the component. Sorry, just a side note here, looking at the compiled output. Oh man. Okay, let's see if we can figure this out still. Because what's factory? Okay, well, this is an H function. Normalize props. But it just takes me back to that node implementation. Okay. So this is just a simple wrapper over it that basically exposes the H function in case, I guess, you wanted to use it, like someone else wanted to, but it is still just a wrapper over it. So this is not, I want the reconciler here. Okay. factory host, JSX runtime, slot types. Okay, so this is not it. Okay, so let's try render TS. Probably more interesting to me than most people. Let's see if we can get here. Cursor reconciler. What is cursor reconciler? Okay, we're getting closer, I think. So, what is cursor? So this is how slot injection works. Slot non can user slotted no reconcile element. Not finding it yet. One thing that is possible is if you're not doing keyed reconciliation, it is a lot simpler. I might not actually detect the array reconciliation code as easily because the routine is doing by index is basically just a for loop somewhere. You can like look for for loop and probably find it. But yeah, not in this file. Oh well. Yeah, I don't think there's a keyed reconciler, so I can't run my comparison in the same way because I only have results and stuff. I only test keyed. I pretty much ignore non-keyed. So yeah, okay. Well, something to add for the future. Good to know, though. As I said, I was only working on this today. So does render slots, types. I think that's it for the render portion here. See how their prop handling is, but it's probably not terribly interesting. Oh, actually, it is kind of interesting because they have all the special props, but other than that, children true. Okay, cool. That's something for me to look on my own time. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's pretty fair. It's interesting. You can see how much the APIs have evolved already because look at this version. The component was an object with on render on it with a Qwik thing. So this probably, yeah, you can already see the APIs evolving. I really like the direction this is heading. I mean they named their state create store, so I mean of course I'd like it, but you can see OnWatch method. Yeah. So it's happening already 2 days ago. Yeah. So OnWatch view calls their effects watches. I'm very much willing to OnWatch. That this is going to be essentially their create effect. Or their tests in this PR, so we can actually see it in action. I want to see it in action. Props. Show it to me. create watcher function. Subscriptions.get, yeah, subscribe to proxy. Okay, yeah. Get guard subscription. Okay, yeah. So yeah, I mean, this here is a implementation of an effect. I can recognize it from the way the code is written. Subscribe proxy. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so here we go. Create store count 0, double count 0. Store double count equals 2 times of 0 count. Yeah. So this is using an OnWatch to write back to the store and then rendering them both in. Yeah. So yeah, this is and this dollar sign probably means that it gets hoisted out into its own context separate from the other ones. So they are on their path to doing fine-grained code splitting based on reactivity. Not quite as sophisticated as using a compiler, I think, but this is much more. This is very similar to Solid. So seeing them do this, gives me some thoughts or ideas definitely, because this is basically like this should look pretty familiar to people on the stream. Huh. Okay. Cool. Yeah. This is. I like doing this sometimes, kind of going into the repo and seeing what's being done here. But this is the dollar sign indicator and stuff. Yeah. This looks pretty promising. Okay. Sorry. Kind of went off on a little aside here, but yeah. I don't know. What do we feel about Qwik or thoughts here? I think if I want to kind of step back from all of this and the specific examples is Qwik offers obviously, as I mentioned, a very unique paradigm in terms of how they split stuff up. Because of how the APIs are in front of you, you can't exactly ignore it, but I think it's something you could also just embrace and work within those constraints and get what you want out of it. I think that the data question is still up in the air in terms of the data serialization, which is one of the benefits of partial hydration. Obviously it's not like an end all be all, because most frameworks don't deal with that either. It's one of those places that probably is going to have some consideration in the future. I think though that the way they're using runtime reactivity and still accomplishing this is really interesting. Mishko had mentioned that their trick is they actually serialize the dependencies because everything is based off this one global store. They can actually just serialize like double count and just be like, oh, this depends on double count to be able to run the stuff on the server essentially. They can build the list of dependencies when they run it on the server, and then when they run on the client, they don't need to replay it. As I said, effects are usually client only, so that's probably not the case. But you could picture if you had a memo or something, you could basically use the proxy on the server to know which properties were hit, serialize that, and then when on the client, you don't need to rerun it until one of those properties change. So I think it's a cool approach. Are you going to draw us any pictures? No, I don't know if anything here actually requires that. I was thinking I brought out Excalidraw because I thought that I would have there would be something to explain here on that side visually. But this is I haven't really figured out how to draw this exactly. It's not like server components where there's that hierarchy that's really obvious here. This is just a lot of slicing, and in that case, I feel the similarities with Marco to a certain degree. Obviously, Marco has a different view of how the hierarchies and how the data transcends through components and through files, but this still has this kind of breakdown. As I said, ultimately, it's going to come down to is it better to have the knowledge of what's on the server compared to figuring out what's lazy loaded, right? And grouping it that way. And the answer might be it depends on the type of app. I know like in stuff like e-commerce, you can bank on the fact that most of the pages is static. Like this. So I feel like for e-commerce, I'd rather be in a place where I could use like the dot server Marco's analysis to be able to make those kind of savings. But if I had like a really interactive app, almost like a spa, like a dashboard with a whole bunch of things, and I didn't want to load everything, then Qwik's the only one who can do that in like a way that might not put that much on the end user until you get into this kind of zone. But I mean, I think it depends on the type of thing. So it's hard to evaluate the technology like this because of just how different it is. But it is definitely interesting. Like when I kind of get excited giggles over the fact that I'm looking at a runtime reactive system, like Solids basically is staring me in the face right here in the middle of a framework doing this kind of stuff, because it does suggest that there might be different paths here, like ways to preserve runtime reactivity through this sort of model. Maybe there's a place somewhere in where you have a certain amount of knowledge, so you don't do this sort of thing, but then also can still do this. I think this one thing. If anything, this shows from Qwik is that this might just be there might be a range of solutions that might not be the most ideal in certain scenarios, but maybe still applicable across that range. And that makes me think that there's like more possibility here than like any given solution. Like as I told you, I talked to Dan this week, and I mean they're pretty in on server components, right? And I talked about it a few weeks ago. He had that tweet where he was essentially like, I've seen, I haven't really been looking elsewhere, but honestly, nothing I see interests me at all. And, only React or something like, and I was just like, what? But he also admitted that he wasn't looking at anything. So to be fair, that's kind of self-fulfilling. But they on the React side are very convinced that their VDOM method and their approach is the only way to do stuff. Like even when I mentioned that I can do concurrency without the VDOM, they're like, well, it's a little bit of like, well, what do you mean by concurrency? They're very much on their path. And obviously on the Marco side, we're very much convinced that through compiler analysis and knowledge, we can achieve the most optimization without putting on the end users. And on the Qwik side, I think the assumption being made here is that compilers maybe can't completely cover the gap, and there are situations where things are very dynamic, yet you still do want to be able to benefit from it, right? So like in a sense, Qwik seems like it has the potential, as I talked at the beginning, to be maybe that lazy loading solution. Do you know what I mean? That transitional app thing, like Rich Harris was suggesting, where you kind of like, it's a spectrum, and it's kind of, you kind of go from partial hydration to like spa and back and forth and all that. But the funniest thing is, I mentioned I talked to Misco and stuff, and they're looking at server routing just like React server components, just like Marco, because as I mentioned, you don't want. I showed you the waterfall on the Hackernews. You don't want that like a tenfold when you navigate to some new complicated page because you have to client render it. So no amount of optimizer is going to optimize both for the initial page scenario and for the new page scenario, unless you're producing multiple different bundles and stuff. It just doesn't make sense. So if everyone actually thinks that server routing is the way, then I don't know if transitional apps, or at least as they were stated by Rich Harris, are even a real thing. Like maybe this is a concept that's already dead on arrival before it came. Like, maybe transitional, whatever the transitional app thinks, like maybe it's already over. Like maybe it just never is going to come. And what is more likely going to come is a new type of hybrid app, which I've been suggesting a little bit, is basically the return of the MPA mentality applied to partially client rendered apps, essentially. So MPAs in the client or something. That isn't the same as transitional, because it's not like a spectrum. It's actually a completely different architectural paradigm, the same way that MPAs are different than SPAs. It's like an MPA. It has MPA qualities, but actually also has SPA benefits. And as I said, in that scenario, it's almost easier to start from the MPA side. And I think that's why React server components are the way they are, and why Marco's the way it is. And Qwik is right in the right place too. Like all three of those approaches are right in the right place to leverage and take advantage of this scenario. So yeah, maybe transitional apps, your hashtag transitional apps, are just not a real thing at all. And we are just like seeing the next paradigm, the third evolution of we were MPA, then we were single page app, and now next we're whatever this is. Because I've looked at all the different solutions and they all kind of agree, even though they're like, no, you have to do it our way. They all kind of agree on some fundamentals. And I find that really, really interesting, because if you have that kind of agreement, like maybe there is something there. Maybe they are onto something, and it's definitely not the single page app that we're familiar with. Creating a React server component thing where, if say most of your page, like 80% of your page, are React server components, doesn't feel like the React Suddenly things like Apollo are not what you're reaching for, right? You're like React query would be something that would only run on the server. Perhaps like maybe you don't have React query anymore. Like it is paradigm shifting. Like certain types of libraries just don't make sense anymore under that. And I think that is more interesting to kind of think about, because if these vastly different approaches to solving this one problem, to be fair, or set of problems, can agree on a few things, and they indicate that, I think that's pretty huge. I think I'm a little bit surprised. We aren't talking about it more. Like even on the React side, why they aren't talking about it more. I didn't understand server components until very recently. I kind of just dismissed them, which is a bit unfair. Not dismiss them, but kind of like evaluate them on features. And I think a lot of people aren't kind of connecting the dots on this. So I think this is an interesting potential future that we have going here, because this is not your typical single page app. Even though it looks at first like this could enable like a new type of single page app, I don't think that's what's happening here. It feels like this is actually all about server routing and completely different patterns again. So we're in for a bit of a ride. Even if you're like holding on to React because that's your framework, it's like tomorrow's React is not today's React. So like, can you think of, sorry, I know I'm kind of going on a bit of a tangent rant. Stop me or ask questions in the chat if you don't want me to, but think of the difference an app looks like if suddenly your state concerns, like your global state concerns, just aren't on the client. Like going back to MPA mentality a bit, and think about if 80% of your page is static, so it is server components essentially. Do you have the same perspective on the client components? Like, are you as concerned about the same sort of things? Like, if you're dealing with a bunch of isolated islands, essentially, even if you write your app generally as one consistent app, but if from a stateful standpoint, you have these isolated smaller islands, are you concerned with unidirectional flow as much? and how global state management works and actions and like all the mentality that made React strong at the beginning in Redux. Like I'm not sure. Like, does this actually is this shift so big that it actually changes what we value in terms of what API design looks like? Because potentially, if you can bank on there being a server, which is back to the beginning of the conversation there, do we have a new native, like a new concept of what the baseline for a framework or building UI interaction is? Like, does this just change our perspective on what's valuable? Honestly, I'm not sure, but those are questions that I kind of want to answer because this seems really potentially changing. Yeah, I mean, but I mean, for sure, right? The state moves back into the URL to a certain degree, but it's like it's it's I think that fundamentally changes what you value. Like I've seen a little bit of this on Marco because on the Marco side, you're kind of like people come in and they're like, "Where's the router?" or "Where's the global state manager?" And we're like, we don't have it. And then they're like, "Oh, what a stupid framework." And then you're like, "But you don't really need it." It's I think this goes beyond that though a little bit, but I feel like that's part of the reason why people have been working on MPA frameworks might have a better perspective on what actually is valuable. But picture it now. Picture like I'm going to pull up Twitter again, or actually I already have Twitter here. Picture this. Picture this app. We did this on the nested routing stream, right? And this is one layer of the onion, like the whole page is, and then this section, or then this whole section is another like nested route, and then each of the tabs, like this content here, like the tweets, the tweet replies, is another nested route. So you got like 3 levels here, right? And like, how much does this change if you can just like server render the feed stories and then just send the JavaScript for these buttons essentially? Like, like, and like, what if you had nested server components, like switch to here and not re-render the outside, but server render the inside content? Like, there's just the amount of JavaScript you need just shrinks like completely, and there should be a way to do this piecewise, like with nested routing and whatnot, that you could keep the client-side transitions. You could switching, even though these pages are being server rendered, you could actually like have a nice animation. I mean, Twitter is not doing it; it's jumping like crazy, but you could like, this is almost an indicator that they don't have nested routing here. Do you know what I mean? Like, how do I know Twitter doesn't have nested routing? But I mean, they could just be doing a manual scroll to the top, to be fair. Yeah, maybe that's what's happening here. But the like essentially, like, this sort of partial model could keep that nicety of a single page app. Oh, sorry, I'm not sharing my screen. You guys like can't see what I'm talking about. My bad. Can you see it now? Oh, sorry, that was like 2 minutes of me saying, okay, let me try this again. I forgot I wasn't sharing my screen. Static sidebar, right? This whole large content section. So the first layer is this, essentially, and its outlet is this section, and then this outlet is the feeds, right? I'm so sorry. I got into my rant without showing the screen. But you could picture what I'm getting at is picture if these tweet pages were server rendered, like with a nested router, you could maintain the state of the top part of the app, and then you could basically render all of this stuff on the server and only send the JavaScript maybe for these interactive buttons, so to speak, right? Like, and maybe lazy load the image viewer, or this isn't even an image viewer, it's an article link, but where's one? This one? Like lazy load the image viewer or something. Like you could reduce so much of the JavaScript on this page, yet still maybe make a nice transition as you change the tabs. Because this part stays in the browser and this part is server rendered. Like I think this is like how much actually is even stateful in a really appy page like this, like where you have all these points of interaction. How many pieces are actually static that we really kind of never need to render again in the client if we could do this? Um, yeah, I'm really sorry. Like, it, like if you were at a point where you were really only thinking about these interactive buttons, then like the depth and the scope at which you need your client side interactivity to work is very different. I think. I mean, some snide person's going to be like, huh, you can already do this with web components, and like sort of, but like partial hydration and or sorry, no, sorry. Hydration in web components is a whole other fun beast with declarative shadow DOM and figuring all that kind of fun out. And the be fair, like you still need all the architectural pieces I'm talking about to do this. Web components actually, in a sense, they're nice because they're like little islands that you could put on static HTML. But what we're talking about goes so much beyond that. So it's not. I want to be clear. This I don't think current solutions. We haven't seen this anywhere yet. Which is really interesting to me because you can see elements of it in different places. You might be thinking like, oh yeah, it's kind of like this, but it's also kind of not like that. Like because it hasn't been put together in a certain way yet. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. It's just it's interesting to see that I think that the impact of a change like this is enough that it actually subtly changes everything. And I mean, if you want to think of it on a smaller scale, many of us were around, like even the newer people around when React hooks came out and how that changed the way people build React apps and changed the patterns. And on one hand, you know, I was mentioning in this new world, MPA people being more familiar on how the pattern should work. Similarly, people who use reactivity were more familiar of how the pattern should work when React hooks came out, and it wasn't like it didn't quite match up with that. And that's probably a source of a lot of the friction these days. But I think this is like even bigger of a change potentially because the yeah, like it's very it's like you're authoring an MPA, you know, like the old web, and it's just nice. Like it just has the smooth transitions and all that. Yeah, I don't think there's anything out there like that today. So, yeah, I'm sorry, we kind of jumped on a tangent from talking about Qwik, because obviously Qwik is a framework that's showing a lot of promise. It hasn't even really even gone to that stage where it's looking into these things yet. But looking at the commonalities between all these different approaches, it feels like they're driving to a certain place that I don't know that the typical SPA frameworks are even thinking about. Like I got to catch up on Vue or Svelte or see what they're working on, because it seems like it's in a very different zone or thinking. Like Next.js knows what's up. Seb from React team's now working on Next.js. So like they're building a meta framework around this stuff. I think it's pretty obvious that if your default thinking is you need server rendering, essentially, like that you've changed the framework. So like server rendering, like to be fair, React server components don't need server rendering, but if for that experience you essentially are like server rendering is like a first tenant, um, then yeah, it does kind of push you towards having meta frameworks. And I think everyone's on the right page on that side, Svelte and Svelte Kit, you know, React with Next or whatever. I think everyone's kind of on the right thinking on that side. It's just, yeah, are we in for a change in front end that we haven't seen in more than a decade? Maybe. All right. I could theorize more and more, but I honestly, I think there's more stuff to figure out. If anything, all of this just makes me more excited to to see Marco 6 come across the finish line and to look at with the future what we're going to be doing with Solid coming up because you know we're also working on our own meta framework, and I think obviously that's going to resemble Svelkit and Remix, but I think there's a longer term objective here. If we can recognize that there is this world, it doesn't offer an interesting question because someone mentioned earlier there are client only apps, and I wonder if there's going to be that big of a difference, like going from the server focus experience to the client experience. Will we be able to make that feel seamless? It's kind of interesting to me because, like, to a certain degree, like React server components feel like they almost wrote a second framework that wraps their original framework. Um, and I wonder how many of these experiences are going to feel like that and have that scalability. They kind of kind of make that seamless swap. Like obviously, I already showed that Qwik can client render fine, so maybe the model stays the same there. Marco does largely too, but um, I think that's interesting. Like stuff like server components having rules might ultimately either, well, it could be a strength. It could also ultimately be the thing that makes um, it feel like there's two different types of React or whatnot. So I think this is all things for us to evaluate and kind of consider for the future. But yeah, I've enjoyed looking at each of Marco, Qwik, and React server components and kind of really getting a feel for um, the kind of impact or change that they're suggesting. Because I mean, stuff's always moving, stuff's always working. Like SvelteKit was a pretty hot thing a few months ago, and it's new. And Remix is doing the really new, innovative things in terms of the way that they're handling certain patterns that have been there forever, but making them feel fresh again. And I think what we're on the precipice of is like a bigger sort of change than that. And I'm excited to see how how this all plays out in the end. But I'm definitely want to be a player in that. So um, uh, look forward to seeing some of the stuff we'll be building coming up. Anyway, sorry, long rant at the end, but if anyone's got any more questions or whatnot, I think I'm good on the stream. It doesn't have to be the longest stream. We got a good dose of Qwik and got a bit of a feel for it, and we talked about the future web dev. So I'm pretty content with myself here. So I think I am good to sign off. So thank you all for joining my stream this week. I'm going to be, I believe I'm going to be, I've got some, I've been working on some stuff. So we'll see. I'm hoping to probably write an article about Qwik coming up here pretty soon, kind of tie together a lot of the thoughts. There's a couple things that, that are coming soon in Qwik and kind of fill some of those gaps. So I might wait on that. But otherwise, yeah, let's all meet up next week for whatever stream we'll be doing. I haven't quite decided what that is, but interestingly enough, it seems like every week there's something new and something interesting. So have a good night, everyone, and till next week. See ya.